Well, hello Eternal Life fans. I'm Rowan Horn, reporting for the Eternal Life Fan Club. I'm here speaking with Jordan Sparks. He is the founder of Oregon Cryo, is that how you...
Oregon Cryonics.
Oregon Cryonics. And so, Jordan, to start this conversation off, so we're at the End Death Conference. Why do you want to end death? Is that like a big part of your motivation? Is that why you started a cryonics company?
Absolutely. That's the worst thing that could happen to anybody.
I completely agree. I often say that death is the worst thing that can happen to someone, because when you're dead, you have no opportunities whatsoever, right?
It's the worst evil there is. Everything else is less evil than that. Yep.
I agree, because death is permanent, unless cryonics can resuscitate someone. But other than that possibility, it seems permanent, unless there's some kind of afterlife. No one knows, but it's just a hypothetical conjecture at this point.
Well, when somebody is cryonically preserved, we don't consider them dead.
That's right. They're a patient.
They're patient, and the information and the wiring in the brain is all still intact, so they haven't died yet. Now, there's a lot of different definitions of death. We go over all those definitions on our website. There's legal death, medical death, clinical death, information theoretic death, and the information theoretic death is why we don't consider them dead. The information is still there. They are revivable, potentially. Now, if somebody's been cremated, they are no longer potentially revivable by any current physics that we can imagine.
Yeah.
So that person is dead. That's different.
Yeah, there's a saying that goes around in the cryonics movement that says, being cryopreserved is the second worst thing that can happen to you, right? The first worst thing being cremated or buried.
Well, yeah, cryopreservation is not a good thing to happen, but it's a whole lot better than death. When somebody gets cryopreserved, it's never going to be perfect. There's always going to be information loss. There's going to be damage. There's going to be some number of ice crystals and areas that don't get preserved well. I would be happy with 80 or 90% preservation of the information. It's never going to be 100%. But and people who get really poor treatment, maybe they go undiscovered for 5 hours before they're found, and then they get taken care of. Well, that's just too long. That we might only be able to preserve 20 or 30% of somebody like that. That's still better than nothing. So it's a hard concept for people to get their minds around, this idea of it's not just black and white. It's all a matter of degrees, of how it's all going to be percentages, and people aren't used to thinking like that. So it's not that I'm going to survive or die. It's something in between.
Absolutely. So could you describe a little bit the process your company uses to cryopreserve? Now, I've heard different words like vitrification versus cryopreservation. Could you go into a little bit about the difference and what technology your company uses and how it might compare to the processes of other cryonics companies? Just sort of a comparison there.
Yeah, so cryopreservation would be kind of a general term for storing somebody at a low temperature. So that would include a straight freeze or a perfusion with glycerol or perfusion with vitrification solution. Vitrification is when you cool down in such a way that you avoid all the ice crystals, and so the ice crystals cause an immense amount of damage there. And so vitrification is a lot better than just freezing somebody straight. We use the same techniques that the other companies use. The basic idea is that you get access to the arteries and you pump cryoprotectant fluids in. They're basically like antifreeze. And if you can get the concentrations high enough of the right kinds of chemicals, then the end result will be vitrification. And then you put that person in storage in liquid nitrogen, and that's the cryopreservation part of it.
And your company, it only does neuropreservations, right? Head only, right? No. Could you explain the reasoning behind this choice?
We advertise it as brain only.
Brain only.
And some of the other tissue comes along just because it's too much hassle to remove it. We don't care about saving the ear. It just comes along for the ride. we want to just preserve the brain, but the skull is really thick and hard to get through, and it takes us about 45 minutes to get through the skull. So instead of wasting all that time getting the brain out, we just, we get the person faster to cool them faster. You don't mess with that part of it, and the other tissue comes along for the ride. But the point of it is to preserve the brain.
Absolutely. Have you been inspired at all by Robert Ettinger, the founding father of cryonics? Did he inspire you at all? Did you ever read his book, The Prospect of Immortality?
I've heard about his book constantly over the years. I've never actually had a chance to read it. I've skimmed a few chapters, I think. I was more inspired by Max Moore.
Okay.
In the early 90s, the Extropians. I read their magazines. And yeah, I mean, he's a really good writer, and obviously he inspired a lot of people, and he's finally also decided that life extension isn't really going to pan out, so now he's putting all of his focus on cryonics as well.
I see. Now I'm interested in your personal motivations. I'm someone that openly admits that I fear death. Like you said, I think death is just the worst atrocity, the most horrible thing that could ever happen to someone. Do you have a fear of death?
I have cultivated a healthy fear of death. People who aren't afraid to die are a lot more likely to die. You need to be afraid to die. It protects you.
Yeah, it does. I agree. Fear, it motivates you to survive, right? It's your survival instinct.
It's a way to survive. So of course I'm afraid of death, and if I try to be afraid of death. I purposely work on that. Yes.
Awesome, me too. I see it as I say it all the time. A fear of death is like my superpower. If I could take a pill that would remove my fear of death, I wouldn't do it.
Well, yeah,
right?
you would just.
No. I want to fear, like you said. That's awesome. What do you think are the main reasons why more people aren't signing up for cryonics? Why are they so skeptical?
Humans just aren't very smart. We're very social animals. Much of our brain power is focused on impressing other people, interacting with people, and we do that to the detriment of other things. And we are so ingrained in our society, and a big part of how humans work is we take that information from our elders, from the wiser people who've been around longer, and they've been telling us our whole life that it's a certain way, and we try to come up with our own ideas and think independently, but it's really, really hard to do. Thinking about new ideas takes a lot of work, and we're just not equipped. It's taken me decades to get to where I am, of constantly thinking about these problems. It doesn't come easily or quickly.
Could you during your lecture, I heard that you would actually give free neuropreservation to people who couldn't afford it. That was
chemical
preservation.
Yes.
Okay.
It doesn't cost us anything to store a brain in a container of formalin. Yeah, I mean, it's a few $100s for the chemicals, but the shelf space is no big deal. So
it doesn't require any temperature changes. It's just literally complete chemical preservation.
Yeah. And of course we don't recommend that to anybody. We're talking about people who really have no other options. There's a certain number of people who become disabled for one reason or another. Once you become disabled, you're not allowed to work. If you're getting disability from the government, you can't. You're not legally allowed to have any income. So how can you? Life insurance will turn you down. They have no options. And there's a lot of people out there like that, or older people who had something go wrong. Usually it's a medical problem that really causes problems in people's lives, ruins all their plans that they had, and ruins them financially. And so all these people with medical problems and old age who don't have the funds, we have to offer something for those people.
That's very...
we do, on our website it says we charge a certain amount. Yes, we do charge for chemical preservation, and we would like to work with people to try to get that covered, because they're getting a service, they need to pay for the costs involved, and some of the costs that are involved are going to be cremation of the body and things like that. I mean, that's things that they should be covering anyway somehow. And so, but if the funding doesn't come through for some reason, we're not going to throw it in the dumpster. We'll keep it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I was trying to say. I just had a limited time.
I see. So, cryonics, it's not the first option. It's not the ideal thing if you would want to stay alive and not die to begin with. So a lot of cryonics people are into staying really healthy. Are you doing anything personally to avoid death to begin with? Just what are you doing to stay super healthy?
Yeah.
Do you do anything?
Well, of course, I do all the normal things I'm supposed to do: diet, exercise, anything that's reasonable, and that helps at flossing.
That's right, 6 years, right?
Yeah. All those things will add years to your life, and the longer you can survive, the better the cryonics infrastructure will be by the time you need it. I don't think that we will be able to take advantage of radical life extension. I feel like we're going to miss the boat. Especially me. I'm older. I'm in mid 40s. I'm just not going to make it. There's just too much work that needs to be done. So that's my personal opinion. I have a strong medical background. I would say most medical people out there strongly agree with me that we won't see those in our lifetime. And the mainstream medicine is really good at these people are good at predicting short-term things like that. I disagree with them on cryonics, but that's a very long-term problem that they just haven't had time to wrap their brains around. But I do agree with the mainstream researchers on it's just solving aging is a really tough, long slog that we're going to have to go through.
Wow. Yeah. I hope you're wrong. I hope we can cure aging. That's kind of the central focus of what I do, is trying to solve aging so we don't have to die at all. So let's say they can resurrect you in the future, 1,000 years from now. What do you think the future is going to be like? What are you most looking forward to about the future?
Well, I think it's going to be more like a couple hundred years.
Okay.
But it's still going to be very different from what we could ever possibly imagine it will be like. That's just always the way it works out. It's really hard for anybody to predict what it'll be like. So I like to think of different scenarios, different possibilities, and between all of them, somewhere, I can start to get an idea. So, there's different options. They could revive me as a young human, because they will be able to. A human cell has the ability to grow an entire new body, any tissue, any organ. That should be very easy for them to do. So it will if they can repair my brain, there's going to be repair all the little microfractures and all the denatured proteins and the cells with leaky membranes. There's going to be a lot of work to do to repair my brain. If they have technology to do that, building a body is going to be just easy. So that's a plausible scenario. Now they might instead scan the brain and put it into a software, right? There's people are working really hard right now on software that will emulate or duplicate a human, and if you can scan all those connections, it seems very reasonable that you could put the mind into a computer. So there's lots of stuff in between. You could have a mechanical body of some sort, but it's just so ridiculous to even think about that one, what that might be. Now, one thing that people don't think about very often is the archaeology option, where they don't really try to bring me back. They just pull out my memories and my personality and everything for posterity's sake, and they incorporate it into society somehow without actually ever reviving me as a as an individual, because we don't know what society is going to be like.
Kind of like
an
an idea of like an uploaded mind from a mind file. It's not the person, it's just information about the person.
Yeah, I mean, I would think they would want to get it all out, which would include, so they might get the information out, but then they might not start the program running,
Mm-hmm.
so that.
But does that give you any comfort at all that like let's say they were to bring you back, but it's not you anymore. It's not you have no continuity of consciousness. It's basically like a advanced robot replica of you. Does that even give you comfort to know that an advanced replica of you is,
Well, it would still be me. It would. We just can't wrap our minds around. We're so used to having a brain in a body that walks around. It's hard for us to imagine options. But of course there's lots of options out there. And I don't know what they're going to be. And I'm fine with all of them. Yeah.
So but let's say what if it's not you though? You think you're in your brain right now. From your perspective, you're you. But if they were to copy you, it's like a different person, right? It's not you.
You're asking the identity question.
Yeah, the identity question. And it doesn't give you for me, if there was a copy of me and it's not me for real, that doesn't help me. That doesn't give me comfort. It has to be my own identity, my own ego.
I mean, can you wrap your brain around the idea of you being software? And it's really just the patterns. I'm a pattern person, okay? So, I do lots of things where the patterns of what I do are, I'm not explaining this very well. People who ask the identity question, it's because they have a hard time, if you have the mind is the way of thinking, okay? It's, I see something in the world, I have a certain reaction to it, that's the way I think about it, and I have memories that I associate with those things. As long as that's still happening, it doesn't matter what medium it's in. If those things are still happening, if I'm still thinking, that's all that's needed. Some people want to bring back the exact same tissue, the same molecules, but that's an illusion. Our cells are constantly, the molecules in our brain are very different from the ones that were there a month ago. Food and air has gone into our body. Those molecules have all been replaced with other molecules. There's very little that's the same as it was a month ago. It's not, the molecules that were in my brain a month ago are now floating around out in the environment. They're in a plant somewhere. It's the patterns that stayed the same. It's the thinking pathways that remained. That's what's me.
Interesting perspective. Interesting. Now, I do the Eternal Life fan club, so we're all about living forever, trying to live forever. Now, how does that idea sound to you? Would you consider yourself someone who's a fan of the idea of living forever, really forever? Does that
forever
totally appeal to you?
Yeah, so I don't say it very often because it freaks people out. I start talking about bigger numbers, I'm going to be around for a few hundred years, or a few thousand years, or a few billion years,
Mm-hmm.
And then people are like, oh, wow, that's a really long time. But yeah, it's indefinite.
Yeah.
Maybe the universe will die someday. Okay, fine. And I don't know what happens then, but there's a lot of things. I have no end of things that I want to do. I could stay busy for thousands of years already. It's just going to grow from there. So
Absolutely, me too. Wow. Okay, awesome. Yeah, you fit right into the Eternal Life fan club. We're all about, we don't see a point in time where we'll be like, oh, we've had enough life.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh,
Time to die.
End it. It's like,
Yeah.
Where would that point be? Never. We want to keep on existing forever.
No. Now the problem with that is it immediately conflicts with all the religions out there.
Yeah.
So I don't even talk about that.
Yeah. So what is your main drive? Why are you, if you had to fill in the blank, like, I want to live forever because, like, how would you explain that to someone? Why do you want to live forever? Why do you hate death so much?
Well, there's people I love and care about. I want to see things, do things. I love to build things. I can think of all kinds of things I'd love to build. Bigger, better things. Creativity and imagination there's just so much out there to do. Some people who are into cryonics talk about space travel a lot. That's so far. I mean, of course, that would be involved in living forever, but it's impossible for me to think what form that might take. I don't know I doubt it would be human bodies traveling out into space, but that sounds like fun too.
Absolutely. Like when people say, I wouldn't want to live forever because I get bored. That feels really kind of pathetic to me, right? Like the idea of getting bored. Like, how can you get bored in this universe, right? There's too many awesome things to do.
Yeah. A lot of people are trapped in a rut. A lot of people get depression, and that affects their outlook.
Yeah.
Some people they do get bored. I feel bad for them. It's not me.
Yeah.
So,
boy, you're just like such a like mind that you fear death, you want to live forever. Like these are all my main things. And most people, when I talk to them about this stuff, they totally like disagree. But you like really agree. There's nothing worse than oblivion, right? Like being non-existent.
Now, of course, if I was killed and into oblivion, at that point I wouldn't care.
Yeah,
just
exactly.
like before I was born, it's just nothing. I mean, I'm not going to think about it, but I'm going to struggle like crazy to survive. Yeah, you bet.
Rage against the dying of the light.
Yep.
Absolutely. Wow, this is awesome that you really want to live forever and you're so serious about it. What other things are you doing do you do things to really stay safe and avoid dangers?
Yeah.
Like do you avoid, I'm really obsessed with avoiding dangers. Like I will even I'm afraid of flying planes. Like when I travel, it's got a really safe driver and we drive really safely and everything. I just go to the extreme to avoid dangers. I wonder if you're similar in that way. Do you go to the extreme?
Yeah, and I've thought about that a lot. The safest thing would be to just sit in your house and never travel.
Yeah.
You're not going to have a car accident or a plane crash, right? Now, that's not going to work because that doesn't maximize your survivability. You've got to do things in life to help you try to live longer. And unfortunately, that means traveling. If you're going to go a long distance, passenger jet is by far the safest way to do it. So traveling long distance, that's what I do. Traveling shorter distances, I have this massive Escalade that I drive with airbags all over the place, and so unless I get hit by a semi, I should be in pretty good shape. It gets terrible gas mileage, but that's the price I have to pay. So I pay for extra security. I pay for, to live in a better neighborhood where there isn't going to be drive-by shootings or something. And at a certain point, there's not much more you can do. Of course, I won't do risky things like parachuting or bungee jumping or things like that where I've seen people have trouble and get into accidents and things. But I fly small planes. Now, that can be fairly dangerous, but it's one of those things where I think the benefit outweighs the risk. I do it in order to improve cryonics, to improve the business, and to try to cultivate cryonics clinicians. And the only way to do that is that everybody is so spread out, if I'm going to interact with people, I need a way to get around and move people and equipment, and that's what I've chosen to do. I put a brand new engine in my airplane as soon as I got it. There goes a lot of my risk right there, but it's still a combustion engine, and those are known to fail every now and then. So I fly over farmland. I won't fly over mountains. I try to fly during the day. I put extra equipment on my airplane, like traffic, so I can see traffic on the panel, so I can see other airplanes, right, so that I can avoid them a little better. I try to make sure I'm on radar, talking to air traffic control all the time. So, I'm accepting a certain amount of risk. It might not pay off. I might die, but I think that, I'm not doing risky flying. I'm doing the very best I can to do it fairly safely, and so that's the best I can do.
And you flew here?
No, a commercial jet.
Okay.
Yeah, anything long distance would be a commercial jet.
I see.
When I fly the small plane, it's for regional things, like if I'm going from Oregon down to the Bay Area or up to Seattle or something like that. If I was going to go over the Rockies, I need a much larger plane. You've got to get high. You've got to get above the weather. Weather is a big problem, so I just fly on sunny days. Just make sure I don't fly when it's thunderstorms or wind or anything. So that eliminates a lot of the risk right there. I think something like half the airplane accidents are in Alaska.
Really?
I mean, you've got all the weather and stuff that if you just don't fly in Alaska, and that eliminates half of your risk right there.
So if people wanted to, let's say have you had any success in convincing someone who's just diehard against this? What would you tell someone who's an extreme skeptic, or to convince them that maybe this is something they should consider?
No, I've never been able to convince somebody like that.
Yeah.
It has to be baby steps, and they have to get through all these steps. There's so many intermediate steps that they have to go through, and I try to help them up to the next step. But I'm not a convincing person, I guess, because I've never been able to convince anybody. People just get stuck in their ways. They'll think what they're going to think, and nobody's going to change their mind. That doesn't happen from my experience. Yeah. So I do what I do in oblivion, and everybody ignores what I do, and that's just the way it's going to be.
And what would you say to someone who says, that you're going about your eternal life in the wrong way? Let's say there's a religious person that says, you should follow my religion to get eternal life. What would you say to someone like that? That the religious arguments against this.
I can't argue against that. It's irrational. Let's start with the difference between real and pretend. And then once you can get that figured out, then come back and talk to me, and then we'll have an actual conversation. I can't argue with that.
Yeah, what I would say is that's hypothetical conjecture. I would say it's possible. I'm an agnostic atheist, so I'll admit it's possible. I'll give it some leeway, but I'll just say, look, that's conjecture at this point. So don't you want to do everything you can in your power to survive in the only world that you know exists, right? This is all we know. That's sort of my approach. Yeah. The idea of I think it's very cool, to talk to someone and that both people can just admit that death is the worst thing that could ever happen to a person, right? I mean, the idea of ceasing to exist, it's horrible.
Yeah,
and I think people don't want to admit that. It's people have a coping mechanism. It's I always compare it to the fox and the sour grapes. They think it's out of their reach, so they don't even they want to act like it's not even a good thing, right? But they wouldn't want eternal life. It's just a coping mechanism.
Well, we don't have any way to really have it right now. I mean, even cryonics isn't perfect. There's, I'm a very different person than I was 20 years ago. I've lost a lot of my memories. So in some ways, I've already partially died. I have new memories, but we're just not equipped right now for that. So we're trying. Nobody lives forever yet, and until we can see that happening.
It seems. Unless
So
there's
it
a bunch
seems
of big secret
impossible.
society of people who've been hiding it from us.
Right. Now, once it becomes a little more obvious, as soon as you start getting some breakthroughs in medicine where you're starting to extend people's lives just a little bit, it'll become a little more plausible to people. And then they'll be like, oh, maybe, and then, so it's going to take a long time. It's going to take a lot of years for people to gradually come around.
Or if more celebrities start doing it, right? Like Larry King recently.
Larry King
came out.
is for years has been enthusiastic about cryonics. Now, he's a very social person too, and fortunately he's a very independent thinker, but that doesn't completely overcome, his desire to appease his family and not come across as weird. And so, I keep hoping that he'll do it when the time comes. We'll see.
I bet he will. It's surprising to me, and I want to hear your perspective on this, is that, I can understand where the religious people are coming, because they think they've got their eternal life.
Right.
But why aren't more atheists like gung-ho about this idea of cryonics, indefinite life extension, curing aging? It seems like atheists are so complacent when it comes to their own oblivion, annihilation. It's like, why is this?
Well, because curing aging doesn't work yet. There's nothing that will let somebody extend their life. I tried about 15 years ago. For 3 years I did a restricted calorie diet because at the time that seemed like one thing that might extend people's lives a little bit, until it turns out it doesn't really work so well for humans. It works for animals with shorter lifespans, because animals with shorter lifespans already have a built-in evolutionary, when food becomes scarce, they need to live longer so that they have time, a few more seasons, for example, so that they have time to procreate. So they have a built-in mechanism for why they live longer, and it only works with shorter lifespans. You start testing it on animals with much longer lifespans, and it just kind of falls apart. So I'm not on that anymore. There really isn't a way to extend life. Because there isn't a way to extend people's lives, and because people don't take the time to understand cryonics, they just figure there's nothing they can do. Cryonics is really hard to understand the science behind it. I've been studying it for a long, long time. You have to know so much about medicine and there's a lot of technology and medicine that you have to understand cryonics. It's not something that you can explain to people in 2 minutes. It takes me years to explain all of this to people, and a lot of times I just have to build the equipment and show them this is what we're doing. I can't explain that. It's just, and as they see more of it, they begin to understand.
What would you say to someone like Ray Kurzweil, who's popping 150 pills every day, hopes to extend his life? You think that's pretty much not going to work very well? Wishful thinking?
I don't know. Vitamins and supplements those are things that, if I had to try to understand that, I would have to devote years of my life to that. My brain's not very big either. I don't have time to think about all that. I've only got about 40 or 50 years left, and I've been studying like crazy to understand Oregon Cryonics, or to understand cryonics, and so I just don't have enough time in the day to study that. So he has, maybe the doctors he's working with have done that. So more power to him. It might work. We don't know. It'll be a while till we know. It might, it could extend his life a few years. It's not gonna, he's obviously getting older every year, so it's not, it's not. It hasn't stopped the aging process or anything.
Yeah, and he's pretty optimistic, because he's much older than you, and he thinks he's gonna reach that longevity escape velocity plane, which you seem to be very pessimistic about.
Oh, I'm all cynical.
The bridge to a bridge to a bridge type of.
I'm too pessimistic. No, You've got to assume that everything that we try to do is going to be really, really hard, and is likely to fail, and we can overcome it by working harder. Engineering can. Basically, cryonics is a big engineering problem. It's a really complicated engineering problem. bringing people back from it. Extending life through curing aging is also a really hard engineering problem. And so, fine, it'll work out someday, but I can't tell when. I have to assume that it's not going to work out well for me in the short term. So I have to try something else.
Now, here's something I'm really curious about is what kind of, let's say there's like some religious lunatics that want to just like infiltrate a facility and like, take all the cryopreserved brains and destroy them or whatever, right? Are you safeguarding the facility with like guards and like super protection and stuff like that?
Yeah, so in our society, there's always going to be vandals and burglars and those sorts of people. And they might break into the facility for some other reason, maybe not even for the reasons you gave. Regardless of why they break in, of course, you just build strong cement walls and don't have windows and nice big steel doors and we're doing all those things. There's no windows in our facility, because they're an obvious route for people to get in. To get through our walls, you'd have to make a lot of noise for at least half an hour, and that's going to attract attention.
Mm-hmm.
So, and we're always working on making the facility even stronger. Moving to a building that's even has a cement roof. Just to really fully enclose everything.
So let's say there's someone signed up for Oregon Cryonics and they're on their last legs, they're in like a hospice or whatever. Do you have a protocol? Would you like advise them to like get closer to the cryonics facility, or would your team go out there and do that? Because the way I understand it is the least amount of time is best as possible to get them right into that cryopreserved state immediately.
Time is really, really critical. Yeah. That's my big thing, because in a laboratory setting, we can have good results, but you put a little bit of time delay in there, and it's not good. If they're in hospice, they probably waited too long. They needed to move to Oregon before that.
Mm-hmm.
It takes a lot of resources to move somebody who's sick. You can't fly them on a commercial plane, so you start the drive. How do you drive them across country? You have to have caretakers, and it's just, nobody has the resources to do that. So they need to figure out how to move closer to their facility. There's a facility in Detroit, CI is in Detroit, Alcor is in Phoenix, we're in Oregon. You've got to move to one of those places. Mm-hmm. Where there's just, if especially if you're getting older or getting a disease that is that could become a problem. Mm-hmm. You don't want to end up in hospice in New York. It's a terrible that it won't work.
Now, was there a specific strategy of why you chose Oregon to locate? Does it have anything to do with Oregon and their euthanasia laws? Like, you can do assisted suicide euthanasia. Would you ever, if someone was was diagnosed with like cancer or whatever, before a brain tumor, before their brain tumor destroyed their brain, would you ever recommend people to take a suicide pill and preserve their brain before it was completely overtaken by that tumor?
Well, I chose Oregon because this is where I grew up.
Okay.
So it has nothing to do with any laws. It's a pleasant place to live. People like to move to Oregon, so I figured we could easily attract people to Oregon, and that's working out pretty well. Nobody wants to move to the heat in Arizona. Nobody wants to move to the ice in Detroit. So the location is pretty good already, just by chance. Now, as far as the Oregon Death with Dignity Act, we're not going to advise anybody to end their life early to try to get a better preservation. Taking advantage of that law is a decision that anybody can make, regardless of whether they're involved in cryonics, and they'll have that discussion with their doctor and come to a decision. Now, it does happen to work out well for us. The main thing that we like about it is at least we know when the person is going to die. It's always so hard when we think that they've got 2 weeks to live and then it turns out it was only 1 day. or we think they've only got one day to live, and then they hold on for months. It's really inconvenient and expensive when that sort of thing happens. So being able to be there and be ready when they make use of the assisted, physician-assisted dying, that's useful to us. But we're not gonna have that conversation with the patients. We're not gonna push them into that. We'll advise them of what some of their options are, and then they go talk to their doctor about it.
Mm-hmm. Has the law ever given you guys any trouble, or is the government very cooperative with cryonics? Because I've heard in some situations the law can try to interfere with the goals of cryonics.
Cryonics has always been a gray area. It's one of those things that the government didn't anticipate, so they didn't write any law for or against it. So cryonics has usually taken advantage of the Uniform Anatomical Donation Act, UAGA, Uniform Anatomical Gift Act. And that's where any organization can accept a donated body from somebody who's just died. And so the law is pretty uniform across all 50 states, and they purposely are vague in the law about who exactly it is that can accept the body, because they don't want to put too many restrictions on it. They want to make it easy for people. And so cryonics has always taken advantage of it. Recently, there's been, like in Oregon, for example, they're just by chance, they happen to have, they want more regulation. Oregon is kind of a regulation thinking state, and they found all these little unregulated businesses that they decided they kind of wanted to keep a better eye on. And so they've been going through this process for about the last 5 years, where they kind of identify all these different little types of businesses that they don't think should be unregulated, and they try to figure out how to bring them under the umbrella of state regulation. And our business kind of fell into one of those categories. There's actually 3 companies in Oregon who accept bodies who are unregulated, and the other 2 companies accept the bodies and they use them for training surgeons. They have clinics where the surgeons can come and practice, like maybe a new knee joint or something, and they do it basically on a cadaver at that point. And it's a very useful thing. The surgeons need to practice before they go work on a real patient. When a new model comes out, they need to get some practice in on that. And so, they started being regulated in Oregon, and so we fell under that as well. And now we have a license through Oregon. And so, I think, we're the only cryonics facility that's actually licensed explicitly by the state, but the others are still, the other 2 have worked out agreements with their states. They're not unregulated really. They started off unregulated, but the state became involved at a certain point, and they worked something out. So in Florida, it's actually against the law, and so we can't take a body from Florida. Florida didn't think it through too well when they made that law.
Wow.
You have to be. They set the bar too high. They made a law where you have to be a facility that's licensed by the American Association of Tissue Banks, I think it is, and it's a bar that's just way too high. Levels of sterility that are just absurd, and it wasn't designed for our industry.
I see.
So, hopefully they can rethink that law, and we can hopefully prevent that from happening in some other states.
Now, is your company actively researching and pursuing the most advanced, cutting-edge science as far as to improve the process of preservation to even get a better preserve for the brains? Yeah? You're cutting edge of that?
Yeah, there is. We're right now, as a fairly new startup company, we're just grabbing the low-hanging fruit. There's a lot we know needs to be done, and it's really obvious what needs to be done. But as we run out of those sorts of activities to do, of course, we're going to be constantly pushing the bounds of what's possible. We are always going to try to do the very best techniques that we possibly can. We're never going to be satisfied with the status quo. It's always about trying to bump it out a little bit more, get faster transport, faster surgeries, faster, the equipment needs to be more reliable and more compact. There's a never-ending list of things we could do.
Awesome. I guess to finish up here a little bit, I just want to ask: is there any there's a few different options with cryonics. There's a few different companies. Now, is there any selling points that your company has? Maybe a niche that you want to? Why would someone choose your company as opposed to say, some of the other companies?
I've always thought of cryonics as being a regional thing. It really should be, the facility that you're closer to. It's really hard because there isn't cryonics companies in the major cities. So because of that, people are really getting signed up with cryonics companies that they're too far away from their cryonics company, and it doesn't really matter who you sign up with at that point. We are trying to fill a need where, next of kin cryopreservations, for example, and it's always going to be a poor prognosis for those patients. But those are patients who, maybe the son wants to have their elderly parent who just died cryopreserved, and we'll help with that. It's a niche kind of a thing. Any of the other two companies might not accept that person, and so we will. But we're really focused on people in the Northwest, Northern California, and we're trying to encourage people to move here, and we will try to expand that direction as well, but it's going to take us a long time.
In a few sentences, what's the main selling point for cryonics, just in general? Just to sell that to the idea to the public, someone who's maybe a little skeptical, why should they sign up for cryonics?
I really don't see any other options for, once medicine gives up on a person, that's really, cryonics is all that's left. It's either cryonics or permanent death. So it's the only, maybe something else will work out in the meantime, but you've also got to do cryonics.
And I'll be the first to say that it's no guarantee to work, but it's certainly better than being buried or cremated, right?
Yes.
Now I would add on to this. I always say, if you do have a cryonics membership, don't let that take away your fear of death, right? Because it's that fear of death that helps you motivate you to stay alive. So you can't be so confident in it that it's going to work that you become lackadaisical about your life and your safety procedures.
One problem that we have is depressed people. They sign up with cryonics and then they start thinking about suicide. We really try to convince people that is the terrible idea, because they always end up autopsied or undiscovered. I mean, it's not a good thing. You don't want to. People should not be thinking like that. So, but when people get depressed, they can't think clearly, and no, cryonics should make you want to live even longer to try to get to cryonics.
Yeah,
you shouldn't.
It's a last case resort, and that brings me to the other question I wanted to ask you. Do you have any outreach programs to try to outreach to people who are terminally ill? People who have cancer and things like that. Just a last thing, just to tell them, do you evangelize this at all? Do you evangelize your message? Do you have a PR team that goes out and tries to spread this message?
It takes decades to understand cryonics, and when you're on your deathbed is the worst time to be trying to assimilate all of these ideas. You're going to be on medications and not thinking clearly, and you're going to be overwhelmed and worried about your family, and that's a terrible time. We don't do anything like that. We just try to get we try to get people signed up with cryonics long before they ever need it, so they have time to think it through and plan a little bit. It takes a lot of planning at that moment, and it's not the sort of thing that you can do last minute and have a good result.
Yeah. And has your company does it have any patients right now in the facility?
No. We expect to within the next year or two. I expect to get a few patients. We have a pet right now, so we're keeping the liquid nitrogen levels all filled up, but no human patients yet.
All right. I guess where can people find your company? Where do you have a website, anything like that? People can stay up to date.
Yeah, our website is OregonCryo.com, and we do have an extensive website that we're constantly adding to. We try to get all of our techniques and protocols online for the more science-oriented people to look at and try to learn how complicated it is, what we actually do. And we're going to be putting up things like a forum for people to ask questions, but it takes time to build all those things. So right now it's just kind of a website where people can go and just kind of see where we're at right now.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for the interview.
Yeah.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Let us die young or let us live forever. We don't have the power, but we never say never. Sitting in a sandpit, life is a short trip. The music's for the sad man. Can you imagine when this race is won?